He had pictured her as fragile and dainty, with tender fingers to tend his garden, and gentle words to soften the silence of his lonely homestead. Yet when this wagon dust finally settled, Emmett Sloan found himself gazing up at a woman who looked as though she might lift him without effort. Willa Blaine stood 6 feet tall in her weathered boots, with shoulders wider than most men in town, and hands more suited for a plow than a teacup. The note in his pocket now felt like some cruel jest, and the wedding band he had carved from oak appeared absurdly small. 3 months before, Emmett had placed his advertisement in the territorial paper with trembling hands. Honest rancher seeks gentle partner for frontier living. Must value simple pleasures and quiet evenings. He had received a single reply, written in delicate script that spoke of loneliness, mirroring his own. Willa's letters had drawn scenes of warm meals and shared talks with someone who understood the heaviness of solitude pressing down on isolated farms. Never once had she said she was taller than his barn door, Fletcher Knox, the trader who arranged their meeting, cleared his throat nervously as he stepped from the wagon seat. His eyes shifted between Emmett's stunned face and Willa's striking frame. The woman herself looked equally unsettled, her confidence wavering as she took in his slight form and the way he craned his neck to reach her eyes. For a moment they stood frozen in the dusty yard like actors who had misplaced their lines. The silence dragged until it grew unbearable. Emmett felt the curious looks of neighbors who had gathered to witness his mail order. Bride's arrival. Mrs. Henderson from the general store whispered to her husband, behind a shielding hand. Young Tommy Morrison. He even pointed before his mother tugged his arm. The entire scene felt like a public mistake, and Emmett's face burned with humiliation. That had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. Willa finally spoke, her voice deeper than he had expected, though not unkind. You must be Emmett. She offered a hand that swallowed his own when he hesitantly placed it there. Her grasp was steady yet careful, as if she recognized her own strength. I suppose we should talk. The tone suggested she carried the same doubts racing through his thoughts. Fletcher Knox sensed the tension and busied, himself quickly unloading Willa's single trunk. From the wagon, it was heavier than Emmett had imagined, reinforcing the growing truth that nothing about this deal would meet his hopes. The trader's brisk movements revealed his unease with the awkward situation he had helped arrange. Yet, as Emmett noticed Willa scan his modest ranch with what seemed genuine interest instead of dismay, something shifted. She didn't sneer at the plain cabin or the patched corral fence. Instead, she nodded at his neat vegetable patch and the stacked wood beside the porch, whatever shock she felt at his appearance. She hid it with a grace he hadn't expected from someone who looked as though she could snap him in two. The next morning after her arrival brought a crisis neither had foreseen. Emmett's prized bull Dakota had smashed through the reinforced fence overnight and now stood defiantly in Mrs. Henderson's flower garden, 3 houses over. The huge beast was destroying months of careful tending, and Mrs. Henderson's furious cries echoed across the valley. Emmett gripped the porch rail, wringing his hands as he watched the mess unfold. Dakota weighed nearly 2,000 pounds and had the mood of a storm cloud even on good days. The bull had already rushed at two of the nearby men who had tried to get close, driving them scrambling over fences in a clumsy escape. The scene was quickly turning into the kind of local spectacle that would haunt EMTT for years. "You can't rope him from here," Willa said calmly at his side. She had appeared near his elbow without him realizing, moving with surprising quietness for her size. Her eyes stayed locked on the bull with an unreadable expression. "And those fellows are about to get crushed if they keep trying from the front like that." EMTT nodded unhappily. Dakota had always been stubborn, but never to this extent. "I don't know what's come over him." The truth was, he had feared this very moment since buying the bull. He lacked both the strength and the experience to manage such a huge creature once it refused to cooperate. Most of his neighbors knew it, making the situation even more embarrassing. Without warning, Willa stepped down from the porch and strode directly toward the disorder with long, sure steps. EMTT rushed after her, his shorter legs pumping fast to keep pace. "Willa, wait! He's dangerous when upset like this." "Don't!" But she was already halfway across the lot, her attention fixed only on the wild bull. As they neared Mrs. Henderson's yard, EMTT saw the full level of destruction. Roses that had taken 3 years to grow were ground into soil. The carefully placed stones had been scattered like toys. Mrs. Henderson herself stood on her steps, her face red with anger, shouting blame at anyone nearby. Spotting EMTT, her voice rose louder. "That monster of yours has ruined everything," she screamed. "Look at my garden." "Just look at it. You will pay for every plant," emptied Sloane. "If you can't control your animals, you shouldn't own them." Other neighbors nodded in agreement, their faces shifting between pity and clear hostility. Willa ignored all of it. She examined Dakota's stance with a focus usually given to reading hard text. The bull pawed near the broken rose bush, his massive head dropped in a way that hinted at another rush. 2 men showed up with ropes, but they lingered safely back, unwilling to risk those sharp horns. Then Willa did something that froze Emmett's heart. She climbed the fence and started toward the restless animal, her hands empty, her stride slow yet confident. The crowd went still, watching with awe and dread as this towering woman faced the beast that had already scared grown men off. Even Mrs. Henderson cut her rant short, her mouth falling open in shock. Dakota swung his massive head toward Willa, his nostrils flaring with every heavy breath. The bull's eyes rolled wide at the corners, a certain sign of a creature driven past reason. EMTT's throat tightened as he watched his mail-order wife calmly walk toward what seemed sure death. His instincts shouted to stop her, but her steady actions held him still. Willa spoke to the bull in a soft, even tone that reached just far enough for EMTT to hear parts. She didn't use the sharp, harsh voice most did with animals. Instead, her words flowed like water across stones, steady and calming. Dakota's ears flicked forward, his pawing slowly eased. The gathered neighbors held their breath as woman and beast stared across 10 feet of ruined garden. "Easy there, big boy," Willa whispered, raising one palm toward him. "You're not truly angry, just lost and far from home." She stepped closer, and EMTT's chest pounded with fear. The bull might attack any instant, and there was no escape in the enclosed yard. But Dakota did not attack. Instead, something remarkable took place. The giant creature's breathing steadied, and his hostile stance eased bit by bit. Willa kept moving closer, never breaking her gaze, never rushing her steps. Once within reach, she extended a hand and laid it gently on the thick muscle of his neck, just behind his left ear. The reaction was instant and shocking. Dakota's head dipped lower, and a deep exhale rumbled from his chest. Willa scratched the spot with skilled fingers, and the bull pressed into her touch like a massive hound craving comfort. The shift was so dramatic that several onlookers audibly gasped. "Bring me a lead rope," Willa called, still focused on Dakota. Her tone held the calm certainty of someone used to being obeyed. Fletcher Knox dashed off and quickly returned with a length of rope from EMTT's barn. With smooth, practiced movements, Willa crafted a basic halter. In only moments, she was leading Dakota from the wrecked garden as gently as if guiding a lamb. He followed without the slightest struggle, his earlier rage forgotten entirely. The gathered neighbors parted to let them through, their faces filled with awe and confusion. Mrs. Henderson stood frozen on her steps, her planned tirade about livestock management dying before she could voice it. Passing EMTT, Willa caught his eye and gave a small smile that brightened her whole face. For the first time, he glimpsed warmth beneath her intimidating presence. "That north fence post is loose," she remarked lightly, as if pacifying raging bulls was an ordinary task. "We'll need to fix it before he tries another escape." Word of Willa's success spread across the community like sparks through dry grass. By midday, neighbors found countless excuses to drop by EMTT's ranch, masking their curiosity with offers of food or gardening tips. Every visitor stole glances at Willa as she helped mend the fence, their hushed conversations carrying speculation that left EMTT uneasy. Interest reached its peak when Samuel Morrison arrived with his 3 sons, claiming to offer help but clearly intent on seeing the woman who had subdued Dakota with nothing but her hands. Morrison valued strength above all, and he often reminded EMTT of his shortcomings. His presence now shrank EMTT's confidence further. "Heard your bride handles stock better than most men," Morrison said, leaning on a post, his tone casual but loaded. His sons lined up behind him, eyes locked on Willa as she swung a heavy sledgehammer with effortless power. Each strike drove posts deeper than EMTT could manage in twice the effort. Heat rose along EMTT's neck as Morrison's insinuation became obvious. The man doubted whether he could ever protect or support a woman as formidable as Willa. The same doubt had already been gnawing at EMTT, but hearing it out loud cut sharper than he expected. "She grew up on a ranch in Montana," EMTT answered, steadying his voice. "She knows her way with animals." It was the truth, though he had only learned it that morning when she'd mentioned it while judging Dakota's behavior. Her letters had spoken of seeking peace, not of the skills that made her capable of calming a 2,000-pound bull with ease. Morrison's eldest, a confident 19-year-old, stepped forward with the cockiness of someone untested by hardship. "Maybe she'd like help with that digger," he said, assuming his offer would be welcome. "Looks heavy for—" He stopped, realizing a remark about her being a woman might be unwise after the morning's events. Willa paused, lifting her head, sweat shining across her brow despite the cool air. Her face remained cordial but detached as she weighed the young man's offer. "Kind thought," she replied, "but I've found my pace now. Better if you gave EMT to hand with the wire tensioning." Her voice was pleasant enough, though it carried an undertone that clearly ended the discussion. The refusal bruised the boy's pride so visibly that his posture stiffened and his jaw locked tight. The realization struck him hard that this unusual woman required neither his strength nor his defense. Morrison's younger sons exchanged uncertain looks, their confusion obvious as they tried to grasp the new social balance. EMTT observed with a tightening sense of dread. He could almost see Morrison calculating, weighing power, image, and status within the community. Men like Morrison lived by simple rules: strong versus weak, leader versus follower. Willa's presence disturbed those assumptions, making others restless. But what unsettled EMTT most was his own reaction. On one hand, he admired her skill and autonomy. On the other, he worried that her strength threw his shortcomings into sharper relief, flaws he could no longer hide. That evening, once the last curious neighbor finally departed, EMTT found himself sharing silence with Willa for the first time since her arrival. The quiet stretched between them, heavier than the damp stillness that comes before a storm. They sat at opposite ends of the porch, the gap marked not only by distance but also by the weight of unspoken doubts and conflicting expectations. Willa was the one to speak, Her voice edged with fatigue absent when she had stood before the bull. "This isn't what either of us pictured, is it?" she murmured, eyes on the dark horizon where faint stars pricked the sky. Her profile appeared strong, her features angular and steady, so unlike the softer image EMTT had created during months of letters. Uneasy, EMTT shifted in his chair, the wood groaning under him. "I should have been more honest in my letters," he admitted, though even as he said it, he wasn't sure what truths he could have written, that he was smaller than most men, that the ranch often overwhelmed him, that his advertisement had been born not from confidence but king solitude. About what? Willa turned, her bluntness catching him off guard. About being short, about neighbors who judge worth by how much a man can carry. Her tone wasn't mocking. It carried a perceptiveness that made EMTT wonder what past had taught her to see so sharply. The directness demanded honesty in return. "About feeling like I fall short," he whispered. "Not strong enough, not tall enough, not the man I should be for the life I want." The words lingered like smoke from a dying fire. Pungent, lingering, impossible to pull back. Willa stayed silent for a long stretch, her fingers tapping a measured rhythm against her chair. When she finally spoke, it was with a softness that startled him. "Do you know what I noticed today when you watched me with Dakota?" She didn't wait for an answer. "I saw a man more concerned for me than for his own pride. Many would have tried to stop me, would have taken control even at risk of injury, but you let me do what I knew MTT. It felt something uncoil inside, uncertain if it was release or some tangled mix of emotions." Willa's voice carried on, quieter now. "And what I should have confessed in my letters is this. I'm weary of being treated as a spectacle, as some test of strength. My whole life, people have assumed I wanted challengers, men who needed to prove themselves by standing against me." The revelation shifted his perspective completely. All day he had focused on what he lacked, how he measured against others. But her words revealed she carried her own weariness, her own reasons for wanting a different life away from judgment. "So, where does that leave us?" he asked, his tone sincere, replacing the anxious edge that had dogged him since she came. From her pocket, Willa drew a folded sheet, worn soft from many readings. "Do you recall your third letter?" she asked, opening it carefully beneath the dim porch lamp. "You wrote that a true partnership was two people making each other stronger, not one making the other feel smaller." EMTT did remember, though at the time those words had felt naively hopeful, maybe too idealistic to attract anyone serious. He had feared such honesty might turn women away, those seeking only conventional roles. Now, hearing his own words return to him, they sounded like a pledge he wasn't sure he could honor. "I meant them," he said slowly, "but I didn't understand how it might look in real life." He gestured toward the fence they had fixed together, where her skill had been so clear beside his fumbling efforts. "Today showed me how little I know about this land. These animals." Willa folded the letter and slid it back into her pocket, but not before EMTT glimpsed other creased pages tucked within. His letters, kept and reread. The realization that his words had mattered enough for her to preserve them stirred something inside him, something that might have been hope. "You know what struck me today?" Willa asked, turning in her chair to meet him more squarely. "When Dakota broke loose, you didn't run for Morrison or any of the others. You came straight to me. That says a lot about who you are when the pretenses fall away." EMTT hadn't considered his actions that way, but she was right. His instinct had been to go to her, not because he expected her to solve everything, but because deep down he sensed she would understand what had to be done. That level of trust surprised him, given how little time they had known each other. "In my last letter," Willa went on, "I wrote that I was weary of being alone. But I didn't mean only the kind of loneliness where no one else is around. I meant being trapped with my own thoughts, struggles, and hopes for what life might be if I found the right person to share it with." She paused, her gaze resting on his face in the fading light. "I think we both placed ads looking for someone to save us from loneliness. But maybe what we actually need is someone to share loneliness with sometimes, and strength at other times." The idea she presented felt weighty, though Emmett couldn't quite parse every layer of meaning. In his community, marriage usually followed predictable paths. The man gave protection and provision, the woman companionship and domestic care. What Willa described sounded more layered, more genuine than those simple roles. "So, we try," he said at last. "We try to see what partnership looks like when it doesn't fit the usual mold." It wasn't a question, yet Willa nodded, her expression solemn but warmed by faint light. "But first," she added, rising and dusting her skirt, "you're going to show me how you mean to propose, because technically we're still two strangers on a porch." Her voice was playful, but her eyes showed it mattered more than she admitted. EMTT's heartbeat quickened as truth dawned. She was right. Amid all the awkwardness of her arrival, they hadn't addressed the central matter of whether they truly wished to marry. His fingers trembled as he dug into his vest pocket and withdrew a small wooden box carried since morning. Inside lay the ring he had carved from oak that had fallen during winter storms, its surface polished smooth by patient hours. It was plain, unlike the gold bands wealthier men might present, yet he had poured hope into its making. "I wanted to do this properly," he murmured. "To wait until we had spoken, until I knew you weren't disappointed by—" He gestured vaguely, at himself, at the simple ranch, at everything she might not have expected. Willa stepped nearer, close enough for him to catch the honest scent of her work-worn clothes and see curiosity shining in her eyes as she regarded the ring. "May I?" she asked, extending a hand. When he nodded, she lifted the ring delicately, turning it beneath the moonlight to admire the smooth grain and polished finish. "You made this yourself," she said. Not a question, but a statement touched with awe. "How long did it take?" As she spoke, she slipped it onto her finger, testing the fit. As he had feared, it halted at her second knuckle, too small to slide further. 3 months, Emmett admitted, despair tugging at him as he watched. "I began the day after I got your first letter." The misfit of something so simple felt symbolic of every failure since her arrival. He had imagined delicate hands, carved the ring for fantasy instead of truth. But her face showed no frustration. Instead, she smiled, a genuine smile that softened her entirely. 3 months, she repeated gently. "You spent 3 months creating something for a woman you'd never met, with nothing but letters and hope to guide you." She gazed down at the ring stuck on her finger. "Do you realize what that tells me about you?" EMTT shook his head, unable to speak. The day had already drained him with more honesty than he usually managed in weeks, leaving him raw and exposed. "It tells me you're someone who treats important things with care," she said softly. "Someone who puts thought and effort into beauty even when no one is there to see."
"And someone practical enough to know rings can be altered, but character cannot." The words landed with surprising weight. All day, his mind had circled around weakness, size, comparisons that defined him in others' eyes. But Willa pointed toward another measure, other strengths that might matter more. "So, is that a yes?" he asked, the question sounding more fragile than he intended. Willa's reply came not with speech, but with action. She took his smaller hands in her own, placed the wooden ring in his palm, and folded his fingers over it. "Ask me properly," she instructed, her tone both tender and firm. "Not because you think you must or because letters bound us, but because you want to." MTT looked up at her face, seeing her clearly for the first time since Fletcher Knox's wagon brought her. Yes, she was taller and stronger than expected, but her eyes carried warmth absent in letters, intelligence, humor, and something like affection despite their short acquaintance. "Willa Blaine," he said, voice gaining steadiness with each word, "will you marry me? Not because of letters or arrangements or people's opinions, but because I believe together we might build something worthwhile. Something neither of us could manage alone." "Yes," she said simply, the word hanging in the evening air like a vow. but I have conditions. The addendum nodded his stomach, though her gaze remained kind. We're going to resize this ring together. I want to learn woodworking and you'll teach me. And I want you to let me teach you cattle, horses, and all I know that could help here. Relief swept through him so strongly it nearly left him dizzy. Her requests weren't ultimatums meant to reshape him, but openings for shared growth and learning. I'd like that, he answered softly. Every bit of it. Half a year later, with the valley dressed in amber and scarlet leaves, Emmett and Willa stood side by side in the little church at the settlement's edge. The oak ring, now properly fitted and joined by a twin band Willa herself had carved for him, gleamed on her hand. Their union had proven as unusual as their first meeting, yet it had also proved fruitful. The ranch thrived beneath their combined strengths. Emmett's patience and precision, coupled with Willa's physical power and knowledge of livestock, had turned the once humble spread into one of the valley's most admired holdings. Dakota, now secure behind sturdier fencing, had sired calves that carried his size but a calmer nature. More than prosperity, though, Emmett learned that resilience came in many forms. While he would never equal Willa in wrestling bulls or chopping timber, his steady foresight had shown her the value of planning carefully before tackling challenges head-on. The gossip of neighbors had slowly been replaced with admiration, and even hints of jealousy. Others began to note how Emmett and Willa worked in true partnership, weighing choices together, laughing through chores, finding joy in the simplest of moments. As vows were exchanged that crisp October morning, Emmett glimpsed Samuel Morrison among the congregation. The man who once doubted his worth now nodded in quiet respect as the couple pledged loyalty and support for all trials ahead. The mail-order bride arrangement that began their story was no longer relevant, replaced by something far richer. A union built on equality, shared burdens, and a love born from recognizing and embracing each other wholly as they were.